Hello, I would like to introduce you to the book Marx After Marx. It is a psychographed work, dictated by the spirit of Karl Marx himself. It is a real story. The book tells the evolutionary trajectory of Karl Marx, in an extremely personal account. Marx tells a little about his childhood and youth, his longings, and his inner self. But mainly he talks about his trajectory and his adaptation in the spiritual world. On the spiritual plane, Marx faces the consequences of his thoughts and the influence he exercised over millions of people. He is able to realize his mistakes and his successes. And after much suffering, through repentance, he finds new paths and seeks to repair all the evil he has done. It is a very interesting story. And if you want to go deeper into this story, here, in the description of the video, is a link where you can buy this book. Before we start our story, I ask you to like and appreciate this video so that it can reach more people. Subscribe to our channel, and help us produce more content like this. Marx died in March 1883, in London, England. Here in the book, he describes the exact moment of his death. I began to think, and to choke and suffocate, to feel afraid, very afraid until I could not move or breathe. I felt a pressure in my chest and a sharp pain. I was paralyzed for a while and thought it was from dread, until they closed my eyes and I could hear. He is gone. May he rest in peace. They changed my clothes and I think I was put in a coffin. Fear overwhelmed my consciousness, and I screamed like crazy, but my voice wouldn't come out. Help! Help me! I'm not dead. You are wrong. This can't be happening to me. They've gone crazy. You want to bury me alive. A mixture of terrifying dread consumed my mind. And no matter how hard I tried to maintain self-control or move my body, it was useless, all in vain. My body was not responding to my brain's command. I thought it was some kind of body paralysis or some unknown syndrome. I was trying to find answers to my current reality. Hours passed until I felt that they put a lid on my coffin, and I was sure that they were going to bury me alive. The noises diminished until I felt a rattling as I settled the coffin into the earth. And the sound of the earth being thrown on top of the coffin, one by one, was like stabs in my chest. I was sweating cold and suffocating more and more. I exhausted my energy trying to breathe, until I realized that it was too late. Then I surrendered to my fate. I waited for death to come. I lost consciousness a few times, and when I woke up, thinking it was a nightmare, I was faced again with my reality. I realized that death was a long time coming, and concluded that there must be a pocket of air inside the coffin, but, in a way, it would not pass that night, or another day. I lost track of time. Without water and food, I concluded that I would not last more than 2 days. My chest hurt and a headache began to torment me. It must have been death acting slowly. Now it was cold, very cold. I shivered and shivered. It was so cold that I couldn't think straight. I don't know how long I stayed in this stage, but it seemed like an eternity. For hours I lost consciousness, and then when I woke up, I thought I was crazy. It was days, maybe months, I don't know for sure. Until an unbearable smell began to bother me. It was the smell of rotten meat. My hands and abdomen began to tingle or move involuntarily. It felt like there was a multitude of worms crawling in and out of my body, until they reached my mouth and continued to crawl over my face. It was terrible. I didn't want to think about what was happening, but I couldn't help it. Reason told me that it was a worm, that I was dead, but I couldn't accept that thought. There had to be some other scientific explanation. But, as time went on, I began to consider the possibility that I was really dead. But this reality tormented my consciousness even more. I would have to accept that consciousness was extracorporeal and not intracorporeal as I had thought. This thesis would put my entire life's work in check. No matter how hard I tried not to think about anything, the annoyance of the worms and insects was terrible. So I started to curse God, and after a long time I also rebelled against the devil. also against the devil, for if I was dead, why didn't I go to hell? Since I was aware that there would be no place for me in heaven. It was then that I began to offend those whom I had sworn to serve. After all, where were they? And why didn't they come for me at that moment? I would rather go to hell than remain inert in that place. When he says that he began to offend those whom he swore to serve, he is referring to the time when, in search of social ambition and status, he started to attend occult meetings. That was when he broke with God and all that religion represented. He disowned his Jewish origin and took a vengeful stance against the existence of God. Living up to his conceptions of dialectical materialism, Karl Marx's spirit remained bound to his body inside that coffin for 20 years, until he was taken out of it. Marx was taken out of that situation by two abject beings, whose purpose was to take him to meet a being called the boss. On the way to meet the boss, they had to stop in a town so that Marx could be sanitized. After 20 years in a coffin, he was completely disfigured and fetid. When they arrived at the meeting place, they entered a multi-story building and had to wait in a luxurious room. A piece of artwork on the wall caught his eye, a large picture, painted with a red background and embroidered in gold. There was a symbol that he didn't know, but it fascinated him, that caught his attention. It was a Nazi swastika. It is important to remember that at that time, 1903, Nazism was not yet known and Hitler did not happen until more than 20 years later. He describes the boss as a tall, strong, pale being, wrapped in a black cloak. As he entered the room, the two people standing with him greeted the chief with the Nazi salute. And everyone else entering the room also saluted in the same way. The boss got straight to the point. "I have a proposal for you. You will assist some of my representatives." Marx asked, "How can I do that, if I am new here and don't know anything?" "You know enough to serve me, and you will do what you did before, write and teach some of my representatives who are on the other plane, that is, incarnate on earth." Marx asks what topic he would have to write about. The boss answers, "On the same subject on which you are used to. I will provide the means and show you the way. Do you think that everything you wrote while incarnated was your own thoughts? I helped you a lot. Only now you will have the opportunity to put into practice what you have written. You will just include some people and talk directly to them about your ideas." This work of writing, instructing, teaching and influencing that Marx was charged with, gave birth to the Russian Revolution in 1917. After the settlement, Marx spent some time adapting to his new living condition and the place where he was. One peculiar moment is when he relates the surprise he had when he was presented with a computer, something he had never dreamed existed. "I was impressed by such great technology, and fascinated by what that little device could offer me. For the first time in my life I had access to research very quickly. I could access a library with hundreds of books, all with just one small device." His job was to influence a group of Russian comrades. One of them was named Vladimir, whom history would know by the pseudonym Lenin, and the other was Joseph Stalin. It was during the waking state of sleep that the spirit of Karl Marx influenced them, through the phenomenon of mental attunement. They were drawn in unfolding to that city, where they received all the instructions and guidance of what had to be done. On the other hand, the understanding between them was easy, since both Lenin and Stalin had already read his works and were determined to fight for a revolution. It was even easier to get them convinced of what to do. And, in the end, Lenin and Stalin did everything they were instructed, and even a little more. Here in the book there is a part where he talks about Rasputin, the priest and sorcerer who influenced the Russian royal family with his powers, and how he was at the spiritual service of the dark forces, under the command of the same boss. The year 1917 arrived, and the revolution was taking shape, according to the chief's plans. Here it is clear to all of us the total spiritual influence of the dark forces, in what was one of the most important events in human history. Hundreds of thousands were killed, among the Russian royal family, the nobles, the aristocracy, and especially the poor population and peasants. Marx confesses that he hoped that, with the revolution, people's lives would improve, but he saw that this was not the plan of the incarnate leaders and the disincarnate leader. The goal of the darkness, in reality, was to expand its rule, its penetration, and to banish religion from the world. Despite being increasingly committed to the actions dedicated to evil, Karl Marx began to feel an emptiness, the unhappiness of seeing that all his life's work was in vain. He says, "I felt emptier and emptier, more unhappy. Discontent was growing within me. I felt that all my life's work was in vain and I no longer believed in what I once stood for." He continued the work assigned by his boss, but with a feeling of anguish. He was tired of it all, nothing made sense anymore. Faced with the reality that he was witnessing, Marx realized that atheism made no sense and that materialism had collapsed. After a few months, Marx was moved with the contingent of dark beings to another region of Europe, more specifically to Portugal, where events were occurring that contradicted the chief's plans. There were rumors that an angel and the mother of Jesus had appeared to some children, and this was a problem, since Portugal was a country coveted by the boss, who insistently tried to put his incarnate representatives in power to implement fascism. However, this was made difficult by the fact that the vast majority of the Portuguese population were practicing Christians. It is worth remembering that the main objective of this group of dark beings is precisely to banish religion from the world. Marx, then, was in charge of being an observer, accompanying the three children in order to help outline strategies to eliminate them. In the meantime, however, with time and all that had passed, he realized that something was different about him. Being around those children caused the vibration that emanated from them to envelop his spiritual body, awakening emotions that he had not felt for a long time. Let's see how he narrates this fact. "I was surprised. It was something I had never seen before. The vibration started to involve my body, making me feel light and serene. I felt like crying, but I held it back for fear that I was being watched. I sat down next to them and stayed still, watching." He was feeling that something inside him had changed, was being changed internally, and instead of wanting to harm the children, he had feelings of protection for them. He started to stay closer to them so that no harm would come to them. He could not allow harm to come to them. In this part of the book, he recounts everyday scenes and events that happened to the children, such as assaults and even their arrest. His immediate commander had noticed that something was not going well with him, and, suspicious, placed another partner to accompany him. As a result, Marx started watching the children from afar so that they would not be exposed to the evil presence of this partner. And here, he refers to this fellow who was assigned to watch him. He was a real monster of selfishness, brutality, and ferocity. A feeling of spite came out of his eyes. I didn't sympathize with him, and in my heart I was determined to act if necessary. He looked at me with a certain distrust. May 13, 1917 was the day scheduled for the second apparition of Our Lady. Together with his vigilant companion, Marx accompanied the pilgrimage of hundreds of incarnate and disincarnate spirits to the place where the Mother of Jesus would appear. A crowd of people was waiting there, and many others were arriving from everywhere trying to get to the Cova de Iria. The children had to be carried on the shoulders of a man, who tried to make way while people passed their hands and shouted out requests, of the most varied kinds. Some asked for a miracle for healing, others for a message to Our Lady, others for relatives who were in the war. Everyone was squeezing themselves to try to get comfortable, while several spirits, many coming along with the incarnate ones, also tried to get comfortable. It was then that I noticed a building parallel to the physical plane, similar to an emergency room, where the spirits were lined up trying to get medical attention. The moment of Our Lady's apparition arrived. A torch opened in the sky, a ray of light came down, and a strong flash almost blinded him. At that moment, Marx knelt down and began to cry. He couldn't see, he was almost blind. I felt no fear, and a sense of peace and gratitude came over my heart. A feeling of regret overcame me and, like a child, I began to cry, kneeling down. "Forgiveness, my mother. I am not worthy of you. Forgive me. I don't deserve to be here, I don't deserve your forgiveness. I have attacked you, and the Creator. Forgive me." He says that he doesn't know how long he remained in that state until he was supported by a man dressed in white with an emblem that he would later learn was the chain of the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Let's see the dialogue. Stop suffering, my son. Come with us. I can't, I'm a traitor. I am not worthy to be here. I have done terrible things. And the Lord, putting his hand on his shoulder, said to him, Who among us has never sinned, my son? You cannot change the past, but you can learn from it. Change your inner self, try to repair your mistakes, and come. Take advantage of this opportunity that our Blessed Mother is offering you. And, unable to speak, only crying, the weakened Karl Marx was taken to the nearby hospital. During the period he was in the hospital, Marx was recovering. He used the time to study and attend educational lectures. He received a visit from his mother. He learned that his father was reincarnated and had some bad news about his wife Jenny. Aware of his previous acts, he wanted to return to the threshold where he lived, to dispose of and destroy some manuscripts that he had left with the dark group, so that they would not be put into practice. 2 commanders of the Guardians were called to obtain from Marx all the information that might be useful. Marx then detailed the boss's plans and volunteered to go along, in order to prevent the plans of that legion of evil from coming to fruition. He intended to meet with Lenin again, to try to demote him from the idea of revolution. He relates, I went with them to a command base, I can't say where exactly, only that it was in Brazil. But I found something that surprised me. At the time, I considered Brazil a primitive country. The place was not only clean and organized, it was large, and contained equipment so modern that I never dreamed it existed, state-of-the-art technology. I was told that the place did not arouse suspicion and, in this country, because of its energy field, it was the safest place to keep the base. What's more, a spiritual structure was being prepared there that would one day serve as a global support base. Ready for the risky mission, Marx changed his form, to the physiognomy of his youth, in order to go unnoticed by the boss's guards. It was late at night. He entered the room where Lenin was getting ready for bed and returned to his normal physiognomy so that his Russian partner would recognize him. He initially tried to intuit him, but to no avail. When Vladimir fell asleep, it was the opportunity for them to meet in person. Let's look at the narrative of this meeting. Lenin. Listen to me. You have to listen to me. You are being manipulated. This is all part of a sordid plan. You must stop now. Contribute to democracy. Forget these Marxist ideas. I was wrong, completely wrong. Listen to me. You will suffer, and worse, you will subject a nation to suffering. It will be a setback and a huge waste of time for your evolution. He was surprised and stared at me. What the hell are you talking about? What do you mean you were wrong? What about our work? What about the manifest? What about the deanery? You must be going crazy. For God's sake. Lenin, listen to me, I beg you. Before he could finish his sentence, he hit me. His eyes showed fury. God! How dare you say that name? Our mission is to banish religion from the world, have you forgotten? Religion is opium. You must be going crazy, you have become a traitor. Then he started shouting, Traitor! Traitor, traitor! I was invaded by a strange uneasiness and sadness, which clouded my thoughts. They had to leave quickly in order not to clash with the armed guards who entered the place. Marx was left with the feeling that he had failed in his mission. He was frustrated, it was too late. He could see in Lenin's notes all the methodology he had helped to build, it was all synthesized, very well elaborated. He felt like the worst of mortals. He spent the day crying. Frustration, guilt and remorse consumed his soul. His vibration was low, and he began to hear voices of incarnate people claiming to be Marxists. The echo of the word Marxist hammered in his mind and sounded more and more. They were coming from all over the world. He knew that his books were making a success and serving as a source of inspiration. Say it, Marx. That news broke me. I went crazy. I was on the edge of a mental precipice. I could no longer stand up or speak, only beat my head in an attempt to silence these voices. With such a state of imbalance, he was hospitalized again. He was sedated most of the time. When he woke up, he lost his connection with reality, had hallucinations that became more and more real, felt pursued by the voices, heard people laughing and others in revolution, shouting his name. Not even when he slept could he feel calm. On the contrary, he had terrible nightmares about people being murdered in the name of the revolution. He woke up screaming and breaking into a cold sweat. More and more I demonstrated a state of insanity. I don't know how long I stayed in the process. I think it was years. I had no consciousness. I was kept sedated and asleep most of the time, but I kept dreaming and having horrible nightmares. His situation was evaluated and they decided it was better to return him to the flesh so that, through forgetfulness and reincarnation, he could balance his emotional state, since his mental field was being attracted to the umbral regions and he would certainly be captured or destroy himself, and could reach the condition of an ovoid. Due to his imperfections and the responsibility assumed by the bad use of free will, and the connections he had made with the evil phalanxes, this incarnation would be a trial and atonement. He would have to feel the effects of his deeds on his skin. It was the law of cause and effect in action. Marx's new incarnation took place in Ukraine, around 1929. He was born into a peasant family, the fourth child of 7 siblings. We begin our story when he was about 5 years old. He was a quiet boy, not playing with the others, sitting for hours arranging grain in rows. He had an obsession for lining everything up, spoke very little, and would not look anyone in the eye. When he wanted something, he would point to it. Sometimes he would stare at the wall and stare for hours. When his brothers and sisters came close, he would struggle, not liking to be touched, running, and sometimes screaming. He was called crazy. They said, "Leave the crazy one alone. Crazy boy." He just survived. It was as if he wasn't there, he didn't speak, and he hardly noticed what was going on around him. He could not remember another existence, but at the same time, he had disconnected sensations that could not be those of a young child. The reincarnation process had not yet been completed. I was forming a new personality. I only remember the sensations. I felt threatened all the time. I also had no affection for my current family members, only for my mother, and only when she was near me would I calm down. Sometimes she would sing to calm me down. After causing an accident at home, knocking over a pan of boiling water and burning himself on his arms, he was locked in his room for his safety. He was locked up for about 3 years. They would open the door only to feed him, and sometimes they would bathe him and clean his room. He could not communicate, could not understand what was being said to him. It was very tiring when he tried to reason or communicate. He slept very little, hardly rested, didn't feel sleepy or hungry, but sometimes he felt cold, very cold, but he couldn't cover himself. His body sometimes did not obey his brain. One cold night he almost died of hypothermia because he was uncovered. His mother hugged him tightly so that he would not let go, because he was averse to any physical contact. He was terrified of being touched. She continued in tears saying words to me, which I didn't understand, but that day I felt calmer. I was shaking all over, and little by little I was getting warmer. I felt a good feeling, of peace. I saw another woman looking at me. I felt I knew her, and I knew it was my mother. I just looked as she smiled at me, only I could see her. The next day, some soldiers forced their parents to hand over all the food and grain. When the soldier ordered them to open his room to search, he looked into his eyes. The little boy was terrified. He felt like he knew him and someone was saying, "Traitor, traitor." I don't know if it was him or the voices that spoke to me. "You traitorous worm. You'll get the end you deserve." He felt afraid, very afraid, but when he looked to the side, he saw a lady that seemed familiar to him. It was his mother from his previous life. She said, "Have faith and don't be afraid." You have to be strong now. Cling to God. She showed him a crucifix, which calmed him down. In the following days he received little food. He only ate when his mother brought it to him. All the food in the city had been taken away, and they were also prevented from going out to buy or even earn grain. All the crops were supposed to belong to the government, which imposed a target for grain delivery that was practically impossible to meet. The simple act of harvesting a potato or corn on private land was considered sabotage, and the person was sentenced to 10 years in prison or death. His father and older brother were killed trying to get food. The next day his mother could not get up. She was depressed and weakened by hunger. They went days without food. They had only water and salt. Days later, soldiers knocked on the door to see if there was anybody in the house. They went to the room where his mother was lying, very weakened, but still alive, and to him, who was lying on the floor amidst debris and excrement, since, during this period, no one else was taking care of the hygiene of the place. He says, "My head hurt, my stomach didn't even feel it anymore, and my body was skeletal." The soldiers said, "Let's take them today, why come back tomorrow? If they are going to die anyway." They were thrown into a truck on top of other bodies. The smell was unbearable. His mother said softly, she didn't have the strength to speak anymore. "I don't want to die. I'm alive. Let me live. My children, my children." They unloaded the truck with the bodies into a large ditch. Decomposing bodies could be seen next to others. Bodies kept arriving, and death came slowly. I didn't have the strength to speak or scream, or even try to escape. I have no words to describe it. There were so many bodies everywhere. This was one of the greatest crimes committed against humanity, and that he had participated in its conception in his previous life. It was Stalin who had implemented this grain requisitioning policy, starving about 5 million people in Ukraine. Little Kevin was rescued by a group of spiritual doctors and nurses and taken to a spiritual hospital. When he awoke, he no longer looked like the skeletal body in which he had disincarnated. He went to school with other children, and after a few years he went to a kind of university, where he studied and worked. His last incarnation, as Kevin, had been a test of atonement, with compromised speech and reasoning, due to the bad use he made of his brain as Karl Marx. With these remnants, he underwent treatment to analyze and understand the reasons that led him to fail in his reincarnation plan that he had promised to fulfill on behalf of humanity. When he felt ready to recover his faults, he was directed to the work of helping his former genitor, Karl Marx's father, who was incarnated. On this occasion, he would also meet again his beloved Jenny, after so many years. In this part of the book, Marx tells the story of his father, incarnate, living the horrors of Nazism in a concentration camp. The family goes through the bizarre medical experiments, gas chamber, starvation, humiliation, and all the horrors that history has revealed. The book closes with Karl Marx's thoughts, after all his trajectory of pain and learning. He was incessantly involved in works on the spiritual plane in the post-war period. He contributed with teams of spiritual benefactors, trying to be useful and learn more and more. He helped in the development of countless memorials on the earth plane to keep alive the memory of the Holocaust as a lesson for humanity. He gained maturity, became more patient, tolerant, and compassionate. I know I still have a long way to go from perfection, being blessed to work for the benefit of my fellow man. I feel like a different creature, much better than I was. Sometimes I return to those regions where socialism or communism still operates, and I am saddened. I achieved notoriety as a writer at a time when communications were difficult, but for me, this is of no value, and on the contrary, it saddens and embarrasses me. In these moments when the heart is anguished, I raise my thoughts to the high, begging for help and assistance to these people. The law of progress leads us to slow and gradual changes. The spiritual vision broadens our horizons. After a period of time, I began to feel a strong need to try to change the writings that I once considered correct, and which today I am deeply ashamed of. I cried out for a chance to start over. However, he was advised that if he returned to the flesh as he wished, he would be running the risk of forgetting the whole purpose, and with the temptations, if he was not fully strengthened, he could fail in this mission, as could many. He was advised to start little by little, first building up a work on the spiritual plane, which would later be completed on the material. He was advised to continue writing, now with another vision, and could transmit enlightening messages to the incarnate ones. As in the past, I made many mistakes through the texts. Through them I could also repair the damage done, redeeming myself before my conscience. Only through the effort of regeneration can we modify the conditions of those we harm, helping and enlightening them. I have done much wrong and have suffered much to repair the damage done to others and to myself. With the mercy of the Most High, I am grateful for the opportunity of learning and maturing. Time transforms the rudest of creatures. Love is our only way to happiness. Wherever socialism has been implanted, it has only expanded hatred, poverty, misery, dictatorships, and tyrannies. With beautiful and illusory words, it has seduced peoples and nations, leaving them at the mercy of unscrupulous men who acted driven by vanity and selfishness. Before all this, I thought I could change the world with my ideas and convictions, and today I realize how wrong I was, and I never tire of saying that I am ashamed of all this. Who knows, with this act of humility, showing how wrong I was, and all that I went through, after this, it will serve as an example not to be followed. Today I think differently, and I know that, before claiming to change the world, I have to make an effort and change myself. Change must start within us. If we can change ourselves, changing our imperfections is the first step towards evolution. And only through evolution will we one day be able to transform first of all the environment in which we live. We must first learn to be tolerant, and most of all to love our neighbor. Great masters came to earth to teach us the practice of love, tolerance, and charity. People will be able to live together peacefully when they overcome the inferiorities of pride and selfishness. If, with this work, I manage to touch the heart of just one person, I will already be grateful. We have reached the end. I hope you enjoyed the video. And, if you liked it, leave your like and subscribe to our channel. Leave your comments and let us know what you think. See you next time.